So the best way to do that is to, again, Command J or drag copy. I'm going to make two of them. And then one of these is going to be for the new shadows that I create, or the new darkened areas of the image. They're not true shadows like the ones you made with the guitarist. They're just areas that you're bringing into a darker exposure. So rather than call them shadows, we can call them dark exposure. So in order to get that to happen, of course I can't see anything I do on this layer until I turn this one off. I basically would normally, on a smart object, what do? You double click it, it opens up in Camera Raw. You change the exposure. In this case, I'll go down like 3 or 4 stops. I'll go down about 3.5 stops. And you'd think, okay, all I have to do is say okay, but look what it does. It changes all of the copies exactly the same. So you can't do that. I'm going to Command Z that. The way to get this to change differently than the others is you go up into the filter menu and you grab the Camera Raw filter. So you're adding it as a filter, not actually changing the original smart object. So I'm going to bring down my exposure, say OK, and now, hello, that has changed even though the thumbnail hasn't updated yet. You can see that it's changed. And the same thing with this one, which is going to be for highlights. So I have to turn off the layer below, otherwise I really won't see how this differs from the original. And I'm going to turn that on and go back into Camera Raw filter and blast this out to make hot highlights for the edges of the speaker. And it's nice that this is all editable. But remember, if you decide to re-edit the effect, you'll need to do it by going into Camera Raw filter, or I'm going to see what happens if I just went here. See, it changes both. So you always have to re-edit using the Camera Raw filter again. But now I have a bright layer, a dark layer, and I'm ready to go. And what I like to do is label these, so I'd call this maybe whatever it was, plus 1.5, or you can just call it lighten. Whatever you want, or nothing at all. And then it's just a matter of masking. So in this case, referring to this original here, I just need to make a mask and then decide what areas I don't want to have this dark shadow. And in this case, I'm just going to grab a brush, make sure it's loaded with black, and make that brush really large and feather it. And then as I work with low opacity, especially if I'm using a Wacom tablet, this helps quite a bit. I'm just going to lower the opacity to like something between 10 and 15. And now if I brush in the mask, I'm basically preserving the areas that show the original tonality of the speaker, leaving the mask fully black in the areas I want to protect, and leaving the mask white in the areas I want to show through. So one of the areas I've got to take away that darkening is this area here where the controls of the speaker are. So I'd make my brush a lot smaller, probably even harden the brush. And I have to bring the opacity up to a pretty high level in order to effectively brush away the effect of the darkening of that layer. I'm doing a pretty bad job. Here, I'll do a little bit better. So I basically have masked away the effect. So I'm going to turn off the mask so you can see the difference. And then the same thing with the highlight layer. Turn that on, make a mask. But in this case, I'm really going to mask away almost everything except these edges, as you can see by what I've done before. So you get that effect. So it makes sense to start with a black mask. And you can either fill the mask with black, or when you first make the mask, if you hold down your Option key when you make mask, it'll automatically fill it with black, saving you a couple of mouse hits. And now that it's a black mask, I need to switch to using a white brush if I'm going to reveal these edges. And I'm going to soften this brush quite a bit, so I'm going to change the feather to full feather. And I want to make the brush large enough so that as I brush against the edges here, I can be outside the image and just let the feathered part of the brush go inside. And again, I'm doing it pretty ham-fisted without using a mouse or a Wacom, so I'm just using a trackpad. So it's not very accurate. But the nice thing is if I make some mistakes in the mask, all I have to do is use the X key to flip my color swatches, and I can come back in and refine it with black. So it's a little bit like light painting. It's just using the power of the quality level of a raw file in order to change the way lighting appears on an object. And like I said, you can go back to the layer and go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and bring it back down a little bit if it's too hot. And the other thing you can do is fade the opacity of any of these effect layers to soften its effect. So a lot of ways of customizing that. Now I know that you're learning how to light things correctly the first time, but this is a really good power tool for things that you decide to do that you can't light, or if you even want to impose color this way. So for instance, if I wanted to alter the color, I could do it with an adjustment layer, and I'll show you what that looks like. If I wanted to alter the color of these highlights as if I gelled that light, then I can just use an adjustment layer that borrows from this mask. So I'm just going to make an adjustment layer. I'll do color balance in this case. And it's going to affect the whole layer, but I'm going to take this mask and borrow it and give it to this adjustment layer. And the way to do that is basically I'm copying the mask, I'm Option clicking the mask and dragging it up and donating it to that layer. So you could use this on any kind of photograph, but this is our sample just as a product. Now it gives you a lot of flexibility to work after the fact, after the initial shoot. It also lets you decide how much energy you want to put into putting highlights and shadows on with different effects in the studio when you know you can actually do that in post very quickly. It's not that laborious. So that's the effect of it. If I was going to be colorizing part of this, I'd need to clip this adjustment layer. That's another way of doing it. But it doesn't work quite as well, so I wouldn't want to clip it in this case. So any questions before I give you some time to play with it? Pretty straightforward, and I've made a video of that. So I'll stop it now.